title of my message is Small Hands Hold Big Plans. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 3, God tells Joshua that I'm going to give you every square inch of land that you set your foot on. And although we are small, God is in the business of doing bigger and better things for us. And when I read that God was going to give Joshua every square inch, I visualized it. What does every square inch mean? What is it entitled? Like, it seems impossible, unachievable. How can we possibly obtain every square inch? The answer I discovered was prayer. In doing this 40-day prayer challenge, I rediscovered prayer. As you step into prayer, it is a battle. You are planting the seed that you have to be patient with. You're launching it to God, and you have to wait on His reply. And trust me, it's hard to be patient in that. And it's like a muscle that you have to work, you have to consistently work on. And just for you, I created this 3-point survival guide for prayer. Point number 1, prayer helps us to mature. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 3, it says, before you do anything, put your trust totally in God and not in yourself. Then every plan you make will succeed. I'm going to read that one more time. Before you do anything, that means getting up out of your bed, brushing your teeth, going to work. Before you do anything, put your trust totally in God and not in yourself. Then every plan you make will succeed. And of course, we have to align our plans with God's. But when you have that relationship with Him, when you're constantly praying, it's gonna become second nature. And at times it's gonna astound you. It's gonna surprise you, as it has done for myself. And too often, we want quick results. We do not want to wait for the organic produce from our prayers to grow and mature in our season of harvest. And when you haphazardly pray, do not be surprised when you get frustrated. You have to be intentional in your prayer, because God is not a microwave God. You must persist in prayer in order to process your character and produce fruit of the Spirit. My second point is prayer is deep and rich. Before you do anything, understand that God is a God that has conversations. These conversations, like crops, are deep and rich. Are you willing to stay in the conversation long enough to reap the harvest? Plant your prayers in the rich soil, not the shallow soil. Other seeds fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. The seeds sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow. But plants soon wilted under the hot sun. And since they didn't have deep roots, they died. And that is from Matthew chapter 13, verse 5 to 6. Our prayers, like plants, have to have a deep root system. We have to feed off of the nutrition God has given us. When we are not allowing prayer to anchor us, the world will shake and throw us about. In order to experience the peace in the waiting room, you have to learn how to spiritually form. And point number 3, prayer is a marathon. It is an unnatural action that one cannot wrap their mind around. In 2 Chronicles chapter 20, we see this. And Jehaziel is giving this message to Jehoshaphat. And upon hearing this message, King Jehoshaphat knew that he could not win this battle on his own. Being the leader he is, he went to his secret weapon. He went to his best weapon, and that was bowing before our Abba Father. And he did what was unnatural. knowing that God was going to grant them natural rewards. And Jehoshaphat's men bowed in response. Are you doing the same in the settings that God has called you to? How are you influencing those that look up to you? And being a high school teacher, that is a question that is always pondering in my mind. How am I living my life in front of these students, in front of my colleagues? How am I being an example of a man or of a person of dignity, of a person that is going to be respectful to those in the workforce? And for me, like, I'm being very principled of how I'm pouring that into my students. And you're not the only one in prayer. You're not the only one running the marathon. Someone needs your prayers. And years before King Jehoshaphat's great victory, the Israelites also did not have much reasoning behind their march around Jericho. They followed the commands to do something crazy for God. Are you willing to do something crazy for God? And in Joshua chapter 6, verse 1 to 24, it says, Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the army advance, march around the city with an armed guard, going ahead of the ark of the Lord. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests, who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the army, do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout, then shout. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day, they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priests sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. When the trumpets sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when a man gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, man and woman, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her. So the young man who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it. But they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron in the treasury of the Lord's house. And that message from Joshua, like I read it so many times growing up about the city of Jericho, but this time in particular, it was special because earlier this week I had a prayer walk, and I applied the Jericho walk to my own life. And I decided to walk around my prayers. I decided to circle it like outside and walk around it. And I did not leave until God gave me what I was seeking. And at first, I did not want to do it. I did not want people to notice me and think that I was crazy. However, I obeyed. I obeyed and started walking. Because every inch of land, God gave it to me. Each prayer being answered, prayers for the day and for hundreds of years from now. And that might be something that you can exercise for your own life, where you might think the prayer is small, but for God is no small prayer. That prayer might not even be just for you. It might be for future generations, for the legacies of your offspring, for the legacies of your family. In mirroring the Israelites, I walked 6 times around. At first I was like, man, okay, like this is cool. But then as it progressed, as the music I was listening to progressed, I began to really take part in what I was doing. I was like, okay, this is mine. God is giving this to me. Like every inch of land, I was like, this is mine, God. This is nobody else's. And then I walked 7 times around. In the total, 13 times. Imagine that. The Israelites walked around the city of Jericho 13 times. And at the end of the 7th time around, I shouted out and praised God. It was a relief of air. I physically felt the walls falling and the promised land coming more within reach. I can't really explain it in words. It was like the part of the ground, the trees that I was circling, I was like, man, this is coming down. Even though this tree seems impossible to take down, like through my prayers, this is coming with me. My prayers are in there. I'm going to get it. Not just for myself, but for those around me. I'm going to experience what God has for me. Because His word says that I can. So it doesn't matter what the world is saying. Like God says, if I pray like this, I can get what I'm seeking. And I would have never discovered that for myself if I was not obedient enough to pray without ceasing. I know we read that in Thessalonians about praying without ceasing, without stopping, right? But when you really take that into your life and knowing, okay, I'm not gonna just come to God as okay, I prayed today, I'm gonna come back next week. But really being intentional is like, okay, I'm gonna talk to you, God. I'm not just gonna pray. I'm gonna talk to you, and I'm gonna allow you to speak back. That does volumes. That does volumes for how you see yourself, for how you see the world. And I was not going to stop until God answered my prayers. I did not want to leave that circle until He rained His favor and blessings upon me. So today, hold out your hands and hit your knees to the floor. In prayer, allow God to give you the big plans He has for you. On our knees is where we get our strength. On our feet is where we put to action what we prayed for. And just going back over the points of our survival guide for prayer that you have tucked away in your backpack. Point number one, prayer helps us to mature. Point number two, prayer is deep and rich. Like imagine something that you're biting into, like a rich dark chocolate. Like it's rich in in taste, in texture when you touch it. So prayer is deep and rich. And finally, prayer is a marathon. It does not stop. It's not a sprint. You might be running to the answers, and when you get there, it's like, okay, God is like, you have to work on this. You can't skip this. There's no shortcut. You have to work on this. And being humans, we don't want to be told no. We don't want to have to wait for what's to come. But God is an agricultural God. You know that? And what I learned is that when you're planting the prayers, you don't see it because it's planted in the ground. But give it time. When it matures, it will grow. But if you plant it on a shallow soil, it will wilter away. So finally, point number 3 again is prayer is a marathon. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Sunday and an awesome week. I love y'all. God bless.